In the autumn of 1843, two men walked into a wheat field in Hertfordshire, England, and began an experiment that has never stopped. Their names were John Bennett Laws and Joseph Henry Gilbert. They divided the field called Broadbalk into long, narrow strips, and they decided to feed each strip differently. One strip would get farmyard manure, another would get the new chemical fertilizers, a third would get nothing at all year after year. Then they sowed wheat, and they kept sowing it on the same ground every single year. That field is still running today. It is the oldest continuous agricultural experiment in the world, more than 180 years old. And the results are quietly remarkable. The strip that received only manure now holds about 2.5 times as much carbon in its soil as the strip that received nothing. The strip that received chemical fertilizer grew good wheat, but its soil barely changed at all. One field, running since before the American Civil War, proved something most gardeners never learn. You can feed a plant, or you can feed the ground it stands in. Only one of those lasts. This matters because of what happens in an ordinary backyard. A tomato plant starts to yellow. The leaves sag. The flowers drop without setting fruit. Most people see this and assume the plant is dying. Usually it is not. It is missing one specific nutrient, and that nutrient is almost always sitting in the kitchen already, in something about to be thrown away. There are 5 of them. Each one fixes a different problem. None of them fixes everything. And the difference between a remedy that works and a remedy that does nothing comes down to knowing which problem you actually have. The idea underneath all of this was first written down by a German agronomist named Karl Sprengel in 1828 and made famous a decade later by the chemist Justus von Liebig. It is called the law of the minimum. Picture a wooden barrel where every stave is a different height. Fill it with water, and the water only rises as high as the shortest stave. It does not matter how tall the others are. The short one caps the whole barrel. A plant works the same way. If a tomato has plenty of potassium and plenty of phosphorus, but it is short on nitrogen, its growth stops at the nitrogen line. Adding more of what it already has changes nothing. So the goal is not to pour on more fertilizer. The goal is to find the one nutrient that is missing and to deliver exactly that and nothing else. Everything that follows is built on that single rule. The 5 remedies below are arranged from the simplest to the most complete, and the last one turns out to be the same input that built the soil in that Hertfordshire field. Start with the banana peel and the nutrient called potassium. Potassium is the mineral that controls how a plant moves water through its own cells, and it drives flowering and fruiting. A plant short on potassium produces small, watery fruit, and the skins often split as they ripen. Banana peels are genuinely high in potassium, along with smaller amounts of calcium and magnesium. But here is where most people go wrong. They bury the peels in the soil and wait for them to rot. That works eventually, but it can take weeks. Soil microbes have to chew through the tough, dry fiber first, and the potassium stays locked inside it the whole time, while the plant keeps fading above ground. Water is faster. Soaking a few chopped peels in a jar of water for a day or two pulls the soluble potassium straight out, the same way a tea bag releases color into a hot cup. Poured at the base of the plant, the roots can take it up within days. One honest warning before you try it. Potassium shortage shows up first as browning and scorching along the edges of the older, lower leaves. If the yellowing on your plant is somewhere else, potassium is not your missing stave, and banana water will do very little. The second item is used coffee grounds. and it comes wrapped in one of the most repeated myths in gardening. For decades, people have been told that coffee grounds make soil acidic and that you should only use them around acid-loving plants, like blueberries. That is half true, and the half that is wrong matters. Fresh, unbrewed coffee is acidic, but used grounds, the wet ones left in the filter after brewing, are close to neutral. University extension labs measure them at roughly 6.5 to 6.9 on the pH scale, which is almost exactly where most vegetable beds want to sit. So used grounds will not rescue a plant struggling in alkaline soil, and they will not harm one either. What they actually do is add organic matter, feed the earthworms and microbes living in the top inch of soil, loosen heavy soil so water drains through it, and release a small amount of nitrogen slowly over several weeks. There is one real mistake to avoid. A thick layer of wet grounds packed on the surface dries into a crust that sheds water instead of letting it through. Mix them into the top inch of soil, or stir them into a compost pile. Spread thin and worked in, they are useful. Piled high, they do more harm than good. The third item is the one that breaks the most hearts, because the advice attached to it is almost always wrong. Eggshells. The story goes like this. Eggshells are made of calcium carbonate. A tomato with a black, sunken patch at its base has a condition called blossom end rot, which is a calcium problem. Therefore, crush up your eggshells, work them into the soil, and the rot will stop. It sounds airtight. It is not. Blossom end rot is a calcium shortage inside the fruit, but it is almost never caused by a shortage of calcium in the soil. Most garden soil already has plenty. The real cause is usually uneven watering. Calcium can only travel through a plant dissolved in water, so when the soil swings between bone dry and soaked, the calcium never reaches the developing fruit, no matter how much of it is in the ground. And eggshells are slow. Trials from agricultural extension programs show crushed shells can take 1 to 5 years to break down enough to release their calcium. They are useless as an emergency fix. The thing that actually stops blossom end rot is steady, consistent watering and soil with enough organic matter to hold that moisture between waterings. A layer of mulch over the root zone does more to prevent it than a bag of crushed shells ever will. The plant usually recovers on its own once the watering evens out, which is exactly why people credit the eggshells they added the week before. The fourth item is Epsom salt, which is the common name for magnesium sulfate, and it is the most useful and the most overused remedy on this list. Magnesium sits at the exact center of every chlorophyll molecule in every green leaf. No magnesium, no chlorophyll, and without chlorophyll, a plant cannot turn sunlight into food. When magnesium runs low, the older leaves turn yellow in the spaces between the veins, while the veins themselves stay green. That specific pattern has a name, intervenal chlorosis, and Epsom salt dissolved in water can reverse it within days, because magnesium sulfate dissolves instantly, and the roots take it up fast. But yellow leaves are not proof of a magnesium problem. A nitrogen shortage yellows the older leaves evenly. An iron shortage yellows the youngest leaves at the top. Overwatering and root damage can yellow the entire plant at once. Epsom salt fixes one of those causes and does nothing for the rest. And there is a real danger in reaching for it blindly. If the soil already holds enough magnesium, adding more can block the plant from taking up calcium. And that, as we just saw, is one of the ways blossom end rot begins. Magnesium and calcium compete for the same path into the roots. So the rule from the law of the minimum applies hardest right here. Diagnose the deficiency before you treat it. The fifth method is the oldest, and it brings the whole story back to that field in Hertfordshire. Before the year 1909, every farm on Earth ran on the same two inputs: animal manure and compost. Then, in a laboratory in Karlsruhe, Germany, a chemist named Fritz Haber found a way to pull nitrogen out of the open air and turn it into ammonia. 4 years later, an engineer named Karl Bosch scaled it up into a working factory. The result, the Haber-Bosch process, is one of the most consequential inventions in human history. Agricultural scientists estimate that the synthetic nitrogen it produces now feeds about half the people alive, and that roughly half the nitrogen inside your own body arrived there from a factory rather than from the soil. But the Broadbalk experiment captured the trade-off exactly. Chemical nitrogen feeds the plant and leaves the soil more or less as it found it. Manure feeds the plant and builds the ground at the same time, which is why the manured strip holds 2.5 times the carbon of the strip that got nothing. For a single struggling plant in a backyard, the old method still works, and it is simple. A shovel of aged manure, from chickens or cows or rabbits, goes into a cloth sack, and the sack sits in a bucket of water for a few days. The water pulls out nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and a long list of trace minerals, while the solids stay sealed in the bag. One firm rule decides whether it helps or harms. The manure must be aged, never fresh. Fresh manure carries too much ammonia, along with weed seeds and pathogens, and it can scorch a whole row of seedlings in a single day. Diluted down to the color of weak tea and poured at the root zone in the cool of morning or evening, when less of the nitrogen evaporates, this one bucket does the thing nothing else on the list can. It feeds the plant and the soil together. So there they are. 5 things from the bin. Banana peels for a potassium shortage. Used coffee grounds for organic matter and slow nitrogen. Eggshells, with the warning firmly attached. Epsom salt for a magnesium shortage you have actually confirmed. And aged manure steeped into water, the one remedy that feeds the ground as well as the plant. None of them is a cure for everything. Each one answers a different short stave in the barrel. The plant that looks finished is, far more often than not, simply missing one nutrient. The skill was never in buying more. It was in noticing which one. Every bag of fertilizer on a store shelf is built on that same law of the minimum that Sprengel wrote down 2 centuries ago, and a banana peel obeys it just as faithfully. That field in Hertfordshire has been making the same quiet point since 1843, through 5 generations of scientists who never let it stop. If a single struggling plant in your own garden is worth saving, the answer is very likely already sitting in your kitchen. If this was worth your time, subscribe. The channel takes one overlooked piece of science apart like this every week.